Hi. We often don't appear together. This is William, partner, husband, and getting through all of this together as we navigate the waters of Threads of Life and the work of the foundation. So earlier I had talked about the textiles of the hand-spun natural cotton that is used to make this type of textile, which is the what we call a jarret, and the textile over by William, which is the fringed one that we call a sayut. So other than the batiking, what we have also been doing, and William, I'd love to have him explain more about it, is we're doing natural dyes in our studio in solid colors on these pieces, but using the same traditional lengths that come from the community. And our big focus is that we have knowledge of the chain of custody hopefully from the cotton all the way to the different dye products that are used.
Yes, chain of custody has been something that has been really important to Threads of Life from the very beginning. If you look at any of the textiles we have for sale in the gallery, the tag always tells you who made it, where it was from. And so it's applying those same principles to the dye work. So where do the dyes come from? Are they being harvested responsibly? Are they being used appropriately? So the dyes that we're looking to use are the ones that traditionally are color fast and time tested. So for the indigo, we have farmers in Java and in East Bali, and we're developing farmers groups in Flores as well that are growing the indigo. And we've taught them to make the dye, and that's the dye that we're using in our studio. Knowing the chain of custody, we can be accountable from beginning to end of the process. One of the challenges, particularly with indigo, is that it's very difficult to tell the difference between natural indigo and synthetic indigo unless you know where it came from. You can do a little spot test for indigo. If you could tease out a thread from the end and you lay it across the white of a porcelain saucer and light it with a match, it will burn and you will get a blue smear on the white porcelain, which is your indigo. But you can't tell whether it's natural or synthetic indigo from that. The only way really, apart from going to an expensive lab, is to know where it came from, how much the farmers are growing, how much dye they make, how much the dye studio is using, so that you can be accountable to your customers about what the dye actually is made of. So as a comparison, why is this important? We can't all go over to natural indigo 100%. We've done some experiments in a corner of our dye garden where we've taken 100 square meter plot and measured over time how much it produces. From that yield, which I take is totally unrepresentative of the rest of the world, but if we multiplied that out and about how much indigo dye is being used in the world, you'd have to plant every square foot of Canada and Russia in indigo in order to fulfill demand.
Wow.
I mean, even though that's wrong by many multiples, it just gives an idea of the scale. So the natural dyes are about where we showcase our values, where we explore what our values are, where our relationship to the earth is. It can't be what the whole of the fashion industry becomes, but it can become a point of conversation about sustainable use. For the Ceriops dye that we're using, so its traditional use is in the batiks of Central Java. So the components of this is actually the same dye, the brown and the tan. But the dye has three main components, and depending on how you mix them, you get either a dark brown or a light tan. So the dark brown, as you see, is pretty much a high concentration of this dye, which is Ceriops tagal. It's the bark of a mangrove. Now mangroves are desperately over exploited across the world and in Indonesia. Many have been cleared for making shrimp farms. Many have been cleared for development. So responsible use of mangroves is an important issue in Indonesia. So where this is such a wonderful color, we were really concerned to find a responsible source of it. And there is one Forest Stewardship Council certified, say that quickly 10 times, concession in Papua, in Bintuni Bay, where they harvest mangroves for wood pulp. It's big, it's 80,000 hectares. But one of the side projects, one of the community projects there, is to take the bark of the Ceriops, which is a side product of what they do, and the community people in the villages around reduce it into an extract, and we buy that extract.
When you say mangrove, a mangrove is really a system, yeah? So there's many species within that mangrove system. So this is actually one of the species of like 100 different trees in the mangrove.
Oh yeah, it's a very complex forest system.
Yeah.
And the Ceriops grow right at the back, on the landward side of the forest.
So they're most fragile?
Not necessarily most fragile. Mm-hmm. They're not the primary tree in this forest. But they are in the forest while it's being worked. So we were talking about the different dye components here. Another of the three plants that make up this soga dye is Maclura cochinchinensis. This is harvested all over Indonesia, but in many places it's what they would call commercially extinct. So it's not that the plant is no longer available, it's that there aren't enough to harvest anymore. An example of this is in Timor. In the 90s and early 2000s, commercial buyers went through and paid for basically everything to be taken from the whole island. There is only one community that we know that had enough customary control of their landscape that they stopped these buyers coming in and taking everything. So there they still have these mature plants. It's actually a climber. So it's a vine that grows up. It needs a tree to lean on. But they can grow quite big. They can get like this big in diameter. A vine this big is probably a couple 100 years old. And what is sought is the heartwood in the middle, the yellow heartwood in the middle. And it has to get to about 8 or 10 centimeters, about the size of these pillars we've got here on the porch, before you start to get that heartwood. It's already a very old plant before you get there. The challenges in the landscape are that in the 60s and 70s, the livestock practices of the people in Timor changed. They went from having water buffalo, which when you let them go, don't go very far from a water source, to using cattle, which roam everywhere and eat everything. So your Maclura, the older plants survived, the ones in the middle got eaten, and then the very small plants, as they come up, tend to get trodden on or the shoots get eaten. So you've got very young and very old and nothing in between. So one of the groups of people we've worked with in terms of the science of what we're doing is we've worked with ethnobotanists, particularly Tony Cunningham, who's a well-known ethnobotanist. And his knowledge, when we were working in this village, we've been doing this over the last couple of years, is he realized that Maclura cochinchinensis is related to a plant. It's in the same family as osage, which is a dye from North America, which also has big spurs, big thorns, and is used as a fencing plant in North America. So the challenge when you're asking farmers to look, please plant this plant again, they're looking for what's the economic benefit. And saying, here, plant this plant because it's a great dye plant and it will be useful in 150 years. Low motivation there. So, but when you say, put it in your fence rows that are all falling down and let it grow through the fence rows and it's got these great big thorns and it will keep your cattle out of your gardens, then there's motivation. So by doing that, there's a short-term interest for the farmers, it improves their fence lines, and there's a long-term interest for their great-great-grandchildren, and that it becomes a dye plant. So these are the kind of strategies, the ways you have to think in terms of a whole environmental approach, an ecology to textile mindset in order to think about sustainability.
Wow. Amazing.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Challenging.